9 years to the week since she had watched him ride out. Mabel Faraday stood at the pasture fence at the edge of Two Forks and told herself, as she told herself every evening, that she would only wait until the sun touched the rim of the prairie, and then she would go inside. She had said the same thing the evening before, and 1,000 evenings before that. The fence was the last one she'd stood at with him, the low, weathered rail, where Ezra Sutton had held her hands in his big Farrier's fists, and promised to write, and to come back, and to marry her under the cottonwood by the creek, where his people and hers were buried. He had ridden east to shoe cavalry horses in a war that everyone swore would be short. She had gone home and started counting. She had written him every week for the first year, then every week for the second, when no answer came. Then, because stopping felt like a kind of murder, she had kept writing into a silence so complete it was almost a sound of its own. Birthday letters, Christmas letters, letters that grew shorter and more stubborn, all of them going out into the dark and none coming back. The town had a word for a woman like that. 2 words mostly, and neither kind. They said Mabel Faraday had let her best years drain into a dead man's mailbox. She hemmed their bonnets and trimmed their hats and let them think it. She kept the shop, and she kept the fence. That very afternoon the banker's wife had come into the millinery to be fitted, and had said, with the airy cruelty of the comfortable, that it was surely time now. 9 years, dear, think of it. Time Mabel put the poor man to rest in her heart, and let Mr. Pruitt, the widowed grain dealer, call on her. For a woman alone did not keep a shop forever, and Mr. Pruitt was lonely and not unkind. Mabel had pinned the woman's brim and thanked her for her care and said nothing at all, because there was nothing to say that the town had not already decided was foolishness. But her hands had shaken over the pins, and when the bell rang the woman out, Mabel had closed the shop an hour early and walked out to the fence, as she did, to wait out the one more evening she always promised herself would be the last. She did not yet know it would be. The sun was a hand's width off the rim when she saw the rider on the east road. Ezra Sutton had been trying for 11 miles to think of a way to ride through Two Forks without being seen, and had not found one. He kept his hat low and his ruined side turned toward the empty prairie. 9 years of Army Farrier work and a mule's kick, and, at the last, a powder flash that had taken the sight from his right eye and left the left one dim and clouding. 9 years had made him into a thing he did not want brought home. He had a scarred jaw and a stiff leg and 1 good hand's worth of vision left in the world, and he had come back not to claim anything but to stand once, quietly, at 2 graves and a fence, and then go on somewhere no one had ever known him whole. He had not written because at first there had been no time, and then there had been no address that stayed still, and then, after the flash, after the long fever, after the surgeon's flat verdict, there had been no reason he could bring himself to offer her. What was there to write? Come marry half a man who cannot see your face. He had let the silence stand, because he'd believed it was a mercy. He'd told himself she would have married some whole, sound man years ago, and be glad, and that the kindest thing he'd ever done for Mabel Faraday was to vanish and let her. So it made no sense, none, that there was a woman standing at the old fence in the failing light. He drew rein 100 yards off. His bad eyes made a smear of her, a gray dress and pale hands on the rail, and a stillness he did not dare to name. He nearly turned the horse. He nearly rode on into the dusk, and let her be whatever she was, memory or stranger, rather than ride close enough for her to see what he'd become. But she lifted her hand. Just that, a hand raised off the rail, the way you greet someone you have been expecting, and the gesture went into him like a farrier's rasp. Because it was hers, he would have known it blind, and blind was very nearly what he was. He rode the last 100 yards at a walk, because his leg would not let him do it any faster, and his heart would not let him do it any slower. Mabel watched the rider resolve out of the low sun, and did not, at first, let herself believe it. She had conjured him out of 100 strangers on that road across 9 years. But this rider sat a horse the way Ezra had, heavy through the shoulders, easy in the hips, and when he came near enough that she could see the scarred jaw and the clouded eye, and the careful way he held his ruined side away from her, she did not feel the thing the town would have expected her to feel. She felt her whole chest crack open with a 9-year flood. "Ezra," her voice came out of her cracked in the middle. "You came back." He stopped the horse at the fence, close enough now that his one dim eye could make out her face. Older, yes, the girl worn into a woman, but her, unmistakably her, and looking at him with no horror in it at all, only a terrible shining relief. It undid every speech he had rehearsed for 11 miles. Mabel. He got her name out and could not, for a moment, get anything after it. Then, roughly, because rough was all he had left, "You shouldn't be standing here. You should have." He stopped, started again, lower. "I didn't write. 9 years. I never wrote you one line. You know what that makes me. I know exactly what it makes you." She was crying now and did not bother to hide it. "It makes you a man who couldn't find the words. I've been trimming other women's wedding bonnets for 9 years, Ezra Sutton. I know a coward when I sew for one, and you're not it." She gripped the rail. "Where are my letters? I wrote you 500 letters. Where did they go?" And there, at the fence, in the last of the light, they built the shape of it together, the thing that had cost them both 9 years. Her letters had gone to a regiment that never stopped moving, chasing a man reassigned from post to post, Farrier to any troop that needed one, until the mailbags meant for him were franked and sent and lost in the long confusion of the war. His name had been struck from one muster and slow to appear on the next. Twice he had been written down as dead, and once a clerk had told a passing inquiry from Two Forks, some cousin, some kindness, that Sutton E. was killed at the crossing of a river Mabel had never heard of. She had wept for a week over that word, and then, being Mabel, refused it, because there had been no body and no letter, and she would believe a river before she believed the fence would stay empty forever. "They told you I was dead," he said, low, "and you kept writing anyway." "I kept writing anyway. Why?" It broke out of him. 9 years, Mabel. Half blind, that's the least of it. I'm not the man rode out of here. Why in God's name would you wait at a fence for that? Mabel Faraday reached across the weathered rail and took his scarred jaw in both her hands, gently, and turned his ruined face full into the last of the light, so that his one dim eye could see her looking at all of it. The scar, the clouded eye, the years, and not flinching. "Because I didn't fall in love with your eyes," she said, "or your straight leg, or your smooth face. I fell in love with the man who shod old widow Caro's mare for nothing and never told a soul, who mended the churchyard fence around both our family's graves because he couldn't stand to see it lean. That man rode home tonight. The rest is just weather." Her thumbs moved on his scarred cheek. "You came back less than you left, you great fool. I've got enough love saved up for 2 of you. Let me spend some of it." Ezra Sutton, who had ridden 11 miles rehearsing all the reasons she should send him away, put his one good hand over both of hers where they held his ruined face, and bowed his head against the fence rail, and wept the way hard men weep, silently, wholly, all at once, for everything the silence had cost them both. He did not go on into the dusk to somewhere no one had known him whole. He stayed. She took him home that night to the little house behind the millinery, and she fed him at her own table, and she watched him find the fork by touch and turn his head to catch the lamplight on her face, and none of it frightened her the way he'd been so certain it would. What frightened her was how thin he'd worn himself carrying the shame of coming back. He ate like a man who'd forgotten food was a kindness. He flinched when she rose too quick, as if still braced to be sent off, and she understood then that 9 years had not only cost her the waiting, it had cost him the believing that anyone still would. So she set about, quietly, teaching him to believe it again. He would not, at first, let her decide too quickly. That was the last of his pride, and the best of his decency both. He made her walk it out with open eyes. He showed her the worst of it in daylight. How he had to turn his head to find her. How his hand had lost its old sureness, and his leg would not carry a full day at the anvil, the way it once had. How there'd be things a whole man could give her that he never would. He laid it all on the table between them plain. the way you'd show a buyer the crack in a horse's hoof before the sale, because he would not let Mabel choose him out of a girl's old dream and wake sorry. She heard all of it. Then she picked up his ruined hand and looked at the calluses that were still there, Farrier's calluses, and said that a man who could still steady a frightened horse by feel alone did not need two good eyes to build a life, and that she had waited 9 years for exactly this hand and would thank him to stop trying to talk her out of her own patience. They were married under the cottonwood by the creek, where both their families lay, on a bright, still morning with the whole town of Two Forks come to see the thing they'd all long called a foolishness proved out. Mabel wore no wedding bonnet. She'd trimmed 100 for other women. For herself, she wanted nothing between her face and his, one dim sight of it. The town's doubt did not break all at once. It broke on a hot September afternoon at the livery, when the thing happened that ended the whispering for good. A freight team spooked at a snapping tarpaulin and bolted in the crowded street. 4 heavy horses gone mad with panic, dragging a loaded wagon, and a child, the blacksmith's grandson, frozen dead in their path where he'd been rolling a hoop. Grown men scattered, two-eyed men, sound men, dove for the boardwalks. Mabel, coming out of the mercantile, screamed the child's name and could not reach him in time, and knew it. Ezra Sutton could barely see the wagon, but he did not need to see it. 9 years at the forges of a cavalry at war had taught his hands to read a horse's terror through the air itself. The drum of it in the ground, the pitch of the squeal, the exact wrong rhythm of a team past reason. He stepped off the walk into the street on his stiff leg, into the smear of thundering shapes his dim eye could not resolve, and he did the one thing no sound man watching had the nerve or the knowing to do. He did not run from the horses. He moved into them, low and sideways, hands out, making the long, steadying sound he'd made to 1,000 frightened animals in the dark, and he caught the near leader by the cheek strap on pure feel and threw his whole ruined weight into turning its head. The team wheeled, the wagon slewed and rocked and did not go over, and the wheels ground to a stop in the churned dust, a body's length from the boy, who was snatched up shrieking and whole into his grandfather's arms. Ezra stood in the settling dust with the led horse blowing and trembling against his chest, his hat gone, his scarred face plain to the whole street, and he could not see the faces looking back at him, but he could hear the silence, and then he could hear it change. Mabel reached him first. She got under his arm and held on, and did not care who saw her do it. And over her head, the town of Two Forks looked at the half-blind man, who had walked into a runaway team no sound man among them had dared to touch, and quietly, for good, put away its word for foolishness. He set up his forge again at the edge of town after that, and it turned out a half-blind farrier who worked by feel and patience, gentled a nervous horse better than any two-eyed man in the county, and the work came, and then it came steady. In the evenings he learned her face over again with his one good eye and his farrier's hands, until he swore he could see her better in the dark than most men saw in daylight. And on the soft prairie evenings after, when the sun came down to touch the rim, Mabel Faraday no longer went out alone to stand at the fence and count. She stood at it with her husband's arm around her, and his scarred cheek against her hair, the two of them watching the light go, and the fence that had been the loneliest place in the county became the place they went to be glad, because the waiting was over, and the man had come home, and she had chosen him whole, out of all his ruin, and been chosen right back.